Okay, I think we can start. I'm really sorry for the drilling. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, wherever you are watching us from. And thank you very much for joining this event titled Slowly Dying in Bahraini Prisons, a Call for Urgent Action. My name is Alina Karastamatova, and I'm an advocacy associate at the European Center for Democracy and Human Rights. And I have a pleasure to co-moderate this event together with my colleague, Camille Trunoy. For those who don't know us, ACDHR is an NGO seeks to promote human rights and democracy in the Gulf region at the EU level by engaging with EU institutions. I would like to start by mentioning that 10 years ago, after the violently repressed waves of protests in 2011, serious human rights violations and the culture of impunity have continued unabated in Bahrain. Even though Bahrain has ratified multiple international human rights treaties, Bahraini authorities continuously fail to comply with its international commitments, and human rights violations remain pervasive and systematic. Additionally, in recent years, Bahrain has also actively sought to clean its image of a country where human rights violations are widespread through the organization of sports events such as Formula One event, or the establishment of so-called human rights institutions justifying and covering up violations such as the National Institute for Human Rights or the Supreme Council for Women, which is in fact a clear demonstration of whitewashing. To date, many prominent political activists are still unfairly imprisoned and are often subject to torture and further mistreatment while in detention. Bahraini officials have notoriously denied medical treatment to political prisoners detained for their involvement in the 2011 uprising. This includes the denial of the provision of basic health care to the leader of the political opposition, Hassan Mushaima, who is 70 years old and currently serving a life sentence in Bahrain for merely exercising his legitimate right to freedom of expression and assembly during the pro-democracy protests in Bahrain. He suffers from pneumonia prior to his detention and requires scanning every 6 months and routine medical care. And unfortunately, his condition continues to severely deteriorate. The deprivation of medical treatment also affects another important figure of the Bahraini opposition, Dr. Abdul Jalil Al-Singh, who has been sentenced to life in prison for exercising his right to freedom of expression. He is currently on hunger strike to protest the ill treatment he's suffering in prison and has lost a lot of weight. Today, Al-Singh enters his 152nd day on hunger strike, protesting the unjust confiscation of his academic work. Moreover, the COVID-19 pandemic has significantly affected Bahrain and particularly prisoners. Due to unsanitary conditions in prison, as well as persistent medical negligence by the jail prison administration, many inmates suffered from chronic diseases which rendered them extremely vulnerable to the COVID-19. And since April 2021, 2 Bahraini prisoners, Abbas Malala and Hussein Barakat, died after contracting the virus in jail prison and being denied timely access to essential health care, which is a flagrant violation of the United Nations standard minimum rules for the treatment of prisoners. These all emphasize that jail prison authorities have failed to respond adequately to this grave situation and to prevent COVID-19 outbreaks amongst inmates, which put the lives of vulnerable prisoners like Hassan Mushaima and Al-Singh at serious risk. Therefore, it's more than urgent to get a message out there to talk about these political prisoners and urge the Bahraini authorities to release them and all other political prisoners as soon as possible, immediately, unconditionally, before it's too late. Today, we have the pleasure of having Bahraini activists as speakers, Ali Mushaima, Yusuf Al-Huri, and Dr. Said Al-Shihabi. They will uncover the truth about the gross human rights violations currently happening in Bahrain, and will highlight the cases of political prisoners who face systematic denial of medical treatment and degrading detention conditions despite their age and serious health problems. And of course, our speakers will have the chance to emphasize the urgency of the situation and address everyone here to raise awareness of the situation as much as possible and take any action with respect to the cases of Singh and Hassan Mushaima, because every action, no matter how small it is, can make a difference and save the life of innocent people who are just merely speaking their minds and demanding their rights. It's important to mention that today we won't have this Q&A session as such, but please feel free to write any questions in the chat box to each speaker during his intervention. Please, now let me introduce our first speaker. It's Ali Mushaima, a Bahraini political activist and the son of the jailed Bahraini opposition leader, Hassan Mushaima. Ali was sentenced to 45 years in prison in absentia, and his citizenship was revoked, leaving him in a situation of statelessness. As founder of several pro-democracy committees in Bahrain, Ali Mushaima sought asylum in London, where he's currently living. And as you probably know, 2 weeks ago, Ali began a hunger strike outside the Bahraini embassy in London, and today, the 30th day since he's standing bravely in the freezing cold in solidarity with his father and Singh. I'm sure nothing will stop him since he's determined to save both of them and other political prisoners as well. Thank you very much, Ali, for joining us today, despite all the difficulties you are currently facing.
Thank you, Alina. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. I don't know, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we hear you.
Good. Thank you for giving me, yes.
Yeah, Ali, before you will start, I want to ask you one question. Could you tell us more about your hunger strike and how you're managing on these day 13th? And maybe you have some recent updates on your father and Singh that you can share with all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. I will tell you in my speech, which I prepared last night, and I hope that I can read it out in a good way. Firstly, thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak about a topic of great importance. I have entered my 13th day of hunger strike outside the Bahraini embassy to save the lives of Dr. Jalil Singh and my father Hassan Mushaima, and to demand their release. As everyone knows, it is currently very cold in London, with the temperature dropping under 0 degrees last week, with strong winds, which made it more difficult. However, every time I got too cold, I would remember how my father and Dr. Singh were tortured in the freezing cold. I would like to read some words from both their pleadings in court regarding the forms of torture they were subjected to. Dr. Singh said he faced deprivation of sleep, and this is done in the following means: by pouring cold water on the sheet while sleeping, or by making me sit or stand on the bed mattress, then pouring water from the top of my head to the bottom of my body. After making the bed and the pillow wet, they ordered me to sleep in this state. And the air conditioner operates in the highest capacity, and it was winter time. Another kind of torture was making me stand in the corner of the cell with my face to the wall. Then water is poured on my head and entire body, and then being forced to sleep on the floor of the ceramic cells. This horrible method was committed against a disabled academic and is only a brief part of his prolonged suffering. In my father's testimony, he said the following: after beating and punching all over my body, and especially on my head and ears, they spat on me and pushed me until I fell and I was injured. I was about to vomit from the intensity of the cold, but they continue the curse, humiliate, and insult me along with the beating until they took me to the solitary cell. To increase the humiliation, I was given an old torn sponge bed to sleep on, and a dirty old blanket, and a very old smelly pillow. As soon as I lie on the bed, I was surprised by someone, a masked man, bringing cold water in the cold weather while the AC was on and started spilling it over me from head to toe and on the bed and blanket. I stayed shaking. I stayed shaking from the cold and unable to sleep, although I was very exhausted. Both were subjected to similar forms of torture, which proves that, this is a systematic practice. In addition to their continued imprisonment, the perpetrators of torture were not held accountable. Rather, these violations persisted more than 10 years after their arrest. I will conclude with two examples and a reflection. The first example: last July, my father was transferred to a medical facility under the pretext that they were going to seriously monitor his medical condition. However, after 5 months, the reality of matter is that these treatments are nothing more than demonstrative procedure, which are not serious. While many doctors met with my father, he has not received the necessary treatment. On the contrary, he on the contrary, he feels he feels like his condition is worsening as days pass. For example, my father has spent this entire period of 5 months lying down in bed, prohibited from moving except to go to the bathroom, which is less than 2 meters away, while doctors had insisted that he needs to exercise because he has diabetes. Also, we have not been given a medical report for over 10 years. The only positive aspect of the facility is that they allowed family visit, but have also prevented him from the right to have phone calls. It pains me that my father feels more comfortable in a prison than a medical facility, which he calls a double prison, as he feels like the medical facility is worse and like solitary confinement. Second example, Dr. Abdul Singh, as everyone knows, he had to go on a hunger strike to protest his mistreatment and demand the return of his research, which he spent over 4 years working on. What's interesting about this case is that the King of Bahrain established a center for tolerance and personally donated to a musical institute in Morocco to promote culture, as he alleges. However, at the same time, the Bahraini regime have confiscated Dr. Singh's book, which focuses on heritage of Bahrain and its tradition and customs. So how can promotion of coexistence, tolerance, and culture exchange be reconciled with these restrictive measures? The truth is that the Bahraini regime is the enemy of culture, despite its claims otherwise. And the proof of this, besides Victoria Singh's case, is that prior of the Arab Spring, they had demolished mosques, among them Al-Barbari Mosque, which dates back 400 years and is considered a heritage site. Finally, I stand by Dr. Singh and issue this call from my empty stomach, urging everyone to join us in this moral battle and demand the release of Dr. Singh, my father Hassan Mshame, and all prisoners of conscience. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ali, for your speech, for your testimony and updates, and just for being with us today. We admire what you are doing and respect the decisions you've made, and you have our sympathy and support. Now, I would like to give the floor to my colleague, Camille, who will introduce our next speaker.
Thank you, Alina. Hi, everyone. My name is Camille. So our next speaker is Yusuf Al-Huri, who is a Bahraini activist. He is based in Berlin, and he has been working for some time with the Americans for Democracy and Human Rights in Bahrain, ADHRB, which is another NGO. And he attended several UN Human Rights Council meetings in Geneva, where he raised several topics on human rights in Bahrain. So Yusuf, thank you so much for being with us today. And I have a first question for you. You are an activist yourself, as I just explained, and you have been advocating for many years for human rights in Bahrain. For people who might not know the situation, how bad is it actually today? What are, in your opinion, the most pressing issues in terms of human rights in the country right now?
Well, in the beginning, I am so honored to share this platform with Dr. Saeed and with Mr. Ali Mshame, the son of a political leader, Mr. Hassan Mshame. And I'm so pleasure to talk to all those interested about Bahrain human rights situation in Bahrain. The most pressing issue in Bahrain, sure, will be the prisoner, as are more than 2,000 political prisoners are still serving long sentence, and most of them, they are young, and which is they are lost their opportunity to continue the education and to establish the families. And as you know, the political leader, Mr. Hassan Mshame, and Dr. Jalil Singh, and Mr. Abdul Hussein, and Abdul Hadi Al-Khawaja, and the Sheikh Ali Salman, they are the prominent political prisoner in Bahrain and in Gulf state. The prisoner, the most prisoner issue in Bahrain. So, you know, as the human being value, you cannot comparing with another issue.
Thank you so much for your answer. So now that we're talking about political prisoners, you're mentioning is one of the most pressing issues at the moment. We just heard right before you from another activist, Ali Mshame, who is currently on hunger strike. And the reason he took such a drastic action is because the situations he's advocating for, so the cases of Hassan Mshame and Dr. Abdul Jalil Singh are very dramatic. Can you maybe help us understand what the urgency is? Why do we need to act right now on these cases?
You know, the political leader, Mr. Hassan Mshame, and Dr. Abdul Jalil Singh has spent 11 years now in the prison, and in this condition also, as circumstances of the pandemic, as activists, we have to take more action than we argue the missions or states or NGOs to take action. You know, we have been several times in Brussels, in Europe Parliament, and in Geneva, and in New York, and everywhere. We push the international community to do more, more than the criticize. But the feedback of our advocacy is not sufficient or not enough. So to release the Bahraini prisoner. So we have to go more forward steps, as Ali now he's doing. I would like to see also in many of EU capitals also, some Bahraini activities also staying in front the Bahrain embassies and start hunger strike as Ali doing also. You know, Ali is now one model of Bahraini youth, and he's inspiring us also, and he's motivate us to do this also for pushing the Bahrain authority to release prisoner from the prison.
Yeah, you're right. Ali's struggle is so inspiring, and it should indeed push all of us to take more action on these cases. And since we have, you know, on today's event, two major cases that I just mentioned, Hassan Mushaima and Dr. Abdul Jalil's case. So today is actually Dr. Al-Singh's 152nd day on hunger strike. So imagine how long that is. Could you?
It's more than 6 months now.
Yeah.
5 months.
Could you simply explain us who he is and why he is currently on hunger strike?
You know, Mr. Hassan, Mr. Abdul Jalil Singh, Dr. Abdul Jalil Singh, he's a professor in the university, and he's one of the academic also, and he's a prominent human rights defender in the Gulf and in the region also. He was written books since 10 years ago while he's serving his sentence in the prison. And the administration of Jawa prison, they have taken his books as a reprisal and as punishment for him. They want to broken his, resisting in the prison. So Mr. Dr. Abdul Jalil Singh, he doesn't need someone from you as Yusuf Al-Huri to introduce him. You know, you just go through the Human Rights Watch and the Amnesty and hundreds of reports from international community. You will know who's Abdul Jalil Singh is.
Thank you so much. And finally, we have a question from the audience. Someone is asking, has the Bahraini government responded to any international pressure previously?
You know, the special reporter for the prisoner now, they are not allowed him to visit Bahrain since 10 years, since the revolution in Bahrain started 2011. They are never response for any statement or any call from the international community. You know why? Because they have Saudi Arabia and Emirat dirty money protect them. And now they are also behind the normalization. They go also more for to ignore the call from the international community.
Thank you so much, Yusuf. So even more reason to, push even further for the international community to take action until we see some results. So thank you so much again for answering our questions.
I'm so appreciated and honored to be in this flat.
Thank you. And now I give the floor back to my colleague, Alina.
Thank you very much, Camille. And I'm honored to introduce our last speaker, Dr. Saeed Al-Shahabi, a Bahraini prominent human rights defender, journalist, commentator based in London. He was a leading figure in the 2011 pro-democracy movement and is head of the London-based opposition group, Bahrain Freedom Movement. Dr. Saeed, thank you very much for speaking with us today.
It's a pleasure, Alina, and it's a pleasure to see you all, especially these young faces, which are inspiring. So thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, so today we mentioned the cases of political prisoners, cases of ill treatment, willful medical negligence, and all other human rights abuses perpetrated by the prison guards. This mistreatment has reached a critical point, and it feels like nothing will stop Bahraini authorities from breaching their international human rights obligations, despite the strong criticism by the international community and its deep concern over the deterioration of human rights in Bahrain, etc. So my question is, how should the international community, in particular the European Union and the UK, respond to gross systematic violations of human rights in Bahrain? in order to have a positive effect.
Thank you very much, Alina. First of all, I would like to remind all of you that in a few days' time, in 4 days or 5 days, 3 days' time, we will have the International Day of Human Rights, or for human rights. This is a significant day. It marks the day when, in 1948, 10th of December 1948, the members of the General Assembly of the United Nations endorsed the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, or for human rights. So on that day, they about 40 or 50 members at the time endorsed that Universal Declaration. Now, where is that Universal Declaration? How binding is it to the nations, to the world? How effective is the United Nations as a body which is supervising the international system of human rights and democracy? So when we mention the situation of Bahrain, I always think of that Universal Declaration. I always think of the International Day for Human Rights. I always think of the various conventions that have been devised after the Second World War in order to create a safer world for all of us. Now, I can see from the faces that you are all young people in your early 20s, probably late teens. And what does that mean to me when I see you? I just look at your face and say, and still myself, what a world are they going to live in? Can they change this world, or are they going to be influenced and affected by it? I do not wish you to live in a world which ignores your plight, your well-being. I do not like you, and I do not wish you to live in a world which ignores your rights as a human beings, wherever you are. And I do not think anywhere in the world today is totally safe from human rights violations, even under democracies. Probably in the northern part of Europe, Sweden, maybe Norway, the situation is slightly better than other bigger countries in Europe. But generally, when I see these countries coexisting and cohabiting with dictators because they have interests, when I see them putting interests before principles, then I ask myself whether it is the world that we have been struggling to achieve. I belong to an older era. I remember in the 60s, the 70s, when the people were aspiring to achieve a better world. Now, have we achieved that world? When I look at Bahrain and see its relations with the European Parliament, with the European Union, with UK, with America, and how these big powers are just brushing their shoulders aside, and they are not really interested. They may give some lip service to human rights, but at the end of the day, it is business as usual. Only if Mr. Macron, I'm sorry to Camille, but I have to mention your country, that your president has been to Saudi Arabia this week, and he has signed, I don't know, $19 billion worth of armament deal to the Saudis. Is this what you want to happen in your country? What happens? Only 3 years since the Saudis butchered one of their citizens in Turkey. Now, what happened to the international conventions on human rights? What happened? Well, how do we allow impunity to rule our societies? Impunity whereby the criminal will go unpunished, and where the victim will just be buried. And we may, if we are very generous, offer that victim some good words. Now, Ali Mushema is hungry. He hasn't eaten for more than a week. Okay, we support you, Ali. But what? So what? We support him or we don't support him? What difference does that make to him if we do not act? Now, Mr. Singh has been on hunger strike for 5 months. We support him. So what? I think we have to make it material support whereby we try to change our conceptions, our future plans, especially for you as a future leaders of Europe. You will have a role to play, and each of you can make a difference. None of you is peripheral, is useless, is cannot be. I think all of you can make a difference. Every one of you can make a difference by promoting the values and the ideas that we are standing for, by putting pressure on your politicians, by writing, through your lectureship, if you become lecturer at university, through your activism, if you become a civil society activist, in any means, as engineers in your professions, if you are in factories, in industries, you can all make a difference if we have the will to do so. And there are many people who will benefit from you in Bahrain and in other places, in Saudi Arabia, in Egypt, in the United Arab Emirates. Most people are just living under torture, under duress, under inhuman situation. So the situation in Bahrain is bad. This is just, you won't be able to read it, but this is just a letter from a prison dated 2nd of January 1974. And it has got it has got 16 names. Okay, probably many of them have already perished, have already died, but they were prisoners, and they were writing a letter to the president of the National Assembly at the time, the Parliament of Bahrain, that came into existence after the British withdrew in 1971. So we are talking about 74. It was our heydays when we had some degree of freedom. So they were asking the president to take care of their situation. They are just mentioning the situation under which they are living. And if you read it, which is about almost 50 years old, you think that it is today. That just take the names and put Hassan Mushema and put Abdul Singh, and this is just what they are saying now. So after 50 years, what have you achieved? What have our humanity achieved? What have our people achieved? So here I am addressing you to make a difference. And I can assure you that you can make that difference.
As we can see, international community is not doing enough because people, they're still in prison. Abuses, human rights abuses, and impunity prevails. But we can't deny the fact that there is an international pressure on Bahraini authorities. And how do you think it affected the situation? Do you see any positive results or not?
Well, I'm not sure where is the pressure coming from. Yes, the European Parliament did issue a resolution earlier in the year. It was very good. Yes, there are some MPs who are interested and who are concerned about the situation. But apart from that, if the government of Bahrain does not think that harsher measures are going to be taken against it, for example, if the Magnitsky protocols are put into action, if the International Criminal Court is empowered, if Bahrain is put under pressure to sign the Rome protocols and join the ICC, if the Human Rights Council is given some powers. At the moment, it has no powers. It may issue a statement, but it cannot enforce it. For example, linking the Human Rights Council to the Security Council, to the United Nations Security Council, which gives it more power to enforce its decisions. If, for example, there is an international court, a human rights court, which is free to look into complaints. If people like Ali Mshema or others or Musa who were tortured, or Yusuf, can go there and say, look, this is my testimony and these are my torturers, and then immediately this court will take action by issuing writ notices. Today, the problem, my daughters and my sons here, none of you is my brother because you are all young, and you are all my daughters and sons. Look, today we were, me and Yusuf and others, our names were under the Arab Interpol, not the international Interpol, but because once you call for rights in the Arab world, you are considered a terrorist. So immediately the Arabs made their own police structure, and they placed our names there. Not with the international Interpol, because they have different criteria and they would not accept politicizing that system. But now, 2 weeks ago, the head of the international Interpol has been elected, and he is a general who is accused of torture in the UAE. So today's head of the Interpol is a UAE general who was accused of torture. So now in the future, we may all find ourselves there. You might find yourselves, you as Europeans, might you find yourselves under the Interpol because you are asking for human rights to be respected in those countries. Our world is going towards criminalizing civil action, criminalizing human work. Is this what the word we want to go through? Now, what action has the world taken? Unfortunately, there have been good words from some politicians, but apart from good words, no real concrete steps were taken to sanction those who are accused of gross violations of human rights. And unless that happens, we will continue to be in a limbo, and the victims will remain behind bars. And Hassan Mushema, who is 74 years of age, will be tortured by a young man in his 20s or 30s. His grandson will be torturing him. So I'm sorry to say that our world is passing through a very bleak situation.
Dr. Said, we have several questions for you. The first one is, what are your thoughts on the relationship between freedom of press and political prisoners in Bahrain? To what extent is the international community responsible for enabling this form of totalitarianism in the country? I'm sorry.
Totalitarianism.
Totalitarianism, yes.
Okay. The press usually, generally, look, I may sound cynical, okay, but the press is part of any system, any system. So you are talking about France, the press is in bed with the politicians. Usually, the Times here, this is the Times of today, and it is just it is Boris Johnson. This is part of the establishment. Generally, the press, they have a degree of maneuver, but they are supporting the system where they are. So in UK, they are part of the system. Of course, they have a degree of freedom, but it doesn't go far enough to concentrate on the plight of those who need it in the third world, especially in our world. Now, I think I will only enjoy life if I have freedom. The day you try to sew my mouth and to put stitches on it, I will die. I will die, as I will simply die. I personally, I am a journalist. I am a writer, I am a commentator. I was editor of an Arabic magazine for 17 years, Arabic weekly magazine for 17 years in the 90s, and I still have my articles published weekly here in London in Al-Quds Al-Arabi on Mondays. Yesterday, I had an article about the the International Day on Human Rights, for Human Rights, and I expressed my opinion. The day you ask me, you silence me, is the beginning of my death. Now, the press can play a role if it, and there are some journalists who are free and who venture out. But of course, free journalists would not be admitted into dictatorships, into totalitarian regimes. They will not be admitted to Bahrain or to Saudi Arabia or to these countries. So the press is important. You can contribute, you can write, and the press doesn't have to be only in the Times, but it can be through your social media, through your Twitter, through your Instagram. Just express your opinion. Be humane, be part of humanity. Feel that you are my brother and my sister, and let us feel as a community. We love each other. We will defend each other if as much as we can, because at the end, what is the difference between me and you? Color-wise, tongue-wise, religion-wise, race-wise? What does any of this really make sense? We have made this. We have made these walls between us, among us. We shouldn't have walls. We should be free to embrace each other as friends, as brothers and sisters in humanity, and as sons of God. If you have religious faith, which I do, we are sons of God, and we belong to Him. So we are all equal in the eyes of God. None of us is better than the other, is superior to another at all, through his color, his race, his philosophy, whatever. So we can do a difference. We can express yourself. Go and be free in what you write. Be free. Never allow anybody to dictate what you should write and what you should say.
Coming back to the measures, you listed several recommendations. What exactly the international community, that's European Union, UK, they can do. But in your opinion, what are the effective measures? Maybe you think Magnitsky sanctions or global human rights sanction would be a good measure. How do you think? Or maybe you can think about other measures as well.
Number one, first of all, we have if we talk about Europe, we have the European Parliament. We have lobbied a lot at the European Parliament. We had a lot of sympathy from parliamentarians. They issued statements. Some of them went to Bahrain. But of course, the European Parliament, its resolutions are not binding. So they issue resolutions, but then each government have its own policy. Even here, the Parliament cannot enforce its power. It's the government, the executive power, that is in charge of doing foreign relations with other countries. So the European Parliament can be a positive place to express solidarity and condemn violations of human rights. Then the countries, the foreign ministries, can make a difference, but only if we work on them. If we leave them alone, they will go and sign these arms deals. And once you sign, you get $20 billion from Saudi Arabia, you are most likely to keep quiet about whatever they do. So this is number two, trying to put some pressure on the governments, especially Europe. They should just go back about 30 years ago, 35 years ago, they started negotiation. The European Parliament or European Union and the GCC, Gulf Cooperation Council, they started negotiating a free trade agreement. And then at the time, because at that time, Europe and the West was more liberal during the Cold War with Russia towards the end of the Soviet Union in the late 80s. They were liberal. They were for human rights. They were for democracy. So they said to the GCC countries, we'll only sign the free trade agreement if we put a clause, if we agree on a clause on human rights, that will continue our free trade agreement with you, if only if you respect human rights. Gradually, it has fizzled away, this clause. At the moment, they haven't signed that free trade agreement. Still, Europe is shying away from giving away totally their stand on human rights. But I think this is one area where you can push your MPs, your governments, not to sign the agreement without including that clause that life as normal cannot continue unless you respect the rights of your people. And of course, number 4, I have said it before, and I'm sure you heard it, and maybe you have been bored by what I keep saying. I do not believe that human rights can be respected and can be protected under dictatorship. Dictators cannot respect human rights. Dictators cannot defend the human rights. They will never give, because the first thing is that the dictator must allow me to speak out. This is my first right, to be able to use my tongue. But if I say something he doesn't like, he will immediately take me and put me into jail. So he will never respect my human rights, the most important of which is the freedom of expression. So these are the things that Europe can insist on. No journalist must be or maybe arrested. No, but and if they take that decision, then 95% of the Bahraini prisoners will be out of jail because they did nothing but express their opinion. So they must not be behind bars for expressing their opinion.
Thank you very much, Dr. Said. We have the last question for you, which is, the UN was designed to monitor the human rights system, but has the UN acted in a way to release political prisoners in Bahrain? Did the UN hear individual communications, for example?
Well, the UN is practicing and exercising its human rights policy through the Human Rights Council. The High Commission, the High Commissioner for Human Rights in Geneva is the main body through which human rights efforts are channeled. Now, has the United Nations done enough? We must not forget that the United Nations is a collection of states. Now, if we look at the Human Rights Council, we will see that it is a disaster. It is a disaster because it has 47 members. The Europeans are good bloc, maybe about, I don't know, they are about 18, 20 or 21 members. I don't know, I don't recall now how many out of the 47. Europe has, I think, 18 or 20, about 20 members of the Human Rights Council, HRC. And money plays a role. And we must not forget that about 3 weeks ago, the Europeans put a motion forward, a resolution to the Human Rights Council to extend by 2 years the work of the commission that was looking into the war crimes in Yemen. So it has been there for 4 or 5 years, and they wanted to extend its life by another 2 years. But then the Saudis lobbied the members of the Human Rights Council, and at the end, by giving money to those countries, the African countries and Arab countries, at the end, they defeated the EU initiative of extending the work, the mandate of that commission. So this is the Human Rights Council, and you could see that it was not able to continue to work and find out who has committed war crimes in Yemen. Now, if they have managed to come all together and they grabbed the Human Rights Council, what is left for us then? So the United Nations can only work through its members, and the members today are open and susceptible to money, to corruption. Many politicians get money corrupt money from Saudi Arabia, from United Arab Emirates, from Bahrain. Go to the members' interest in your parliament and see how many of them were invited first class with their family or with their wives to spend a week or more in one of these countries. And then you will realize how the disaster that is waiting for you, the future generation, because you will see that the petrodollar is going to control your lives. And I don't think that is a very pleasant future awaiting you if you do not act.
Thank you very much again, Dr. Said. Just to sum up, unfortunately, money and economic relations, they prevail in the relations with the third countries. Therefore, I think we should continue putting pressure on the EU, on the UK, and to remind them that they have their human rights commitments towards third countries. So, and from our side, we will never stop until all the political prisoners in Bahrain are released. Thank you again. And now I will give the floor back to my colleague, Camille.
Thanks a lot. So before we wrap up this event and end on some conclusions and concrete measures that we could all take, we want, of course, from ACDHR to really give a warm thank you to all participants, to all of you who came here and listened today. Of course, also to our panelists, and yeah, a warm thank you. And also, we would like to have a special thought for Ali Mushaima, who is currently on hunger strike, and he's spending the whole day and the whole night in front of the Bahraini embassy in London. And as he mentioned, right now it's freezing. So if you are based in London and you have the opportunity, please go and visit him, because he really needs everyone's support. And if, like us, you're not based in London, you can also help him by amplifying his message, just sharing his posts on social media and give him more visibility, give him, the voice that he deserves.
You can send me on your behalf to represent you.
Okay, thank you. So, today we had kind of a gloomy conversation. It was really discussing problems and a lot of negative thoughts, because the situation is so urgent and the treatment of the prisoners in Bahrain is really dramatic, and the lives of Hassan Mushaima and Abdul Jalil Singh are in danger, simply put. But we wanted to finish on a more positive note to really underline the fact that the change is possible. It's not all negative. There is hope. And the international community really has the power to change that situation. Lately, the states and institutions have developed different legal tools in order to incorporate human rights in their external policies. So, for example, in the EU, we have the European Union guidelines on human rights defenders, which allows the foreign ministries to regularly raise issues of human rights violations in their meetings with Bahraini counterparts. We have also some more coercive tools, so that allow sanctions, to be taken against the perpetrators of human rights violations. So in the EU, there are Magnitsky sanctions. In the UK, they are called global human rights sanctions regulations. And on the other hand, from the legislative branch, we have the elected parliaments, could be European Parliament, member state parliaments, or UK chambers. And they also have the power to raise a human rights situation. They can put pressure on their respective ministries of foreign affairs through joint letters, legislative texts, parliamentary questions, resolutions. So they really have a wide arsenal of how they can put pressure, and talk about human rights. So the tools, they exist. That's my message today. And they have been used in the past. So I just mentioned, the foreign ministries, they have dialogues with the Bahraini government. A lot of parliamentary questions have been asked regarding human rights in Bahrain this year. A lot of members of parliament have publicly expressed their concerns for Hassan Boushema and Abdul Jalil. Earlier this year, and Dr. Singh mentioned it, there was a resolution that was passed in the European Parliament, and the UK Parliament has tabled a motion last month concerning Al-Singh's hunger strike. So all this is sending a strong message to Bahrain, and all this is very positive and shows us that there is a way, there are tools that allow us to put pressure on the Bahraini government. But the struggle is not over, because although we have all these tools and although some of the things are being done, the situation is still getting worse as we speak. And every day that goes by, the health of both Hassan Boushema and Dr. Al-Singh are deteriorating. So the struggle will not stop until they are unconditionally released. And our job is to keep the mobilization alive. So now, as to what everyone can do, for the members of the parliament, we would like to ask to keep putting pressure on your government on these cases, write letters, publicize those cases on social media, make your voices heard on this subject. You can also push for sanctions, because they would be really effective. The members of the European Parliament in particular, we want to ask them to keep issuing parliamentary questions on Bahrain, because a lot were asked this year and it's very positive. And we also urge you to add your signature to a joint letter on Bahrain that we have been circulating with ECDHR that will be addressed to the EAS to put more pressure. And then for the rest of us, simple members of civil society, we can help by providing greater visibility to the struggle of Bahraini activists. We can share content on social media. We can repost the work of Ali Boushema, of all our panelists and all activists in general. And if you're based in the UK, you can also follow an initiative from another NGO called BIRD and urge your MP to sign the motion that was tabled last month on Al-Singh's. So I will be sending the link in the chat in a minute. But the message we want to convey at the end of this event is that we should never forget that we are the only voices that Hassan Boushema and Dr. Al-Singh's have left, because they cannot speak, but we can. And the tools, they exist. It is possible to use them. So we have the means to put pressure on the Bahraini government and have them released. So we just need to take action right now before it is too late. So thanks a lot to all of us who participated today. And thank you, of course, to our panelists for sharing their expertise. And yeah, we hope to continue, the struggle with all of you, and to see you soon at another event. Thank you a lot.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Camille. Thank you, Alina. Thank you, Candice, all of you. You have been wonderful.
Thank you.
Keep well.
Thank you very much.
We wish you a good day.
Thank you, you too.
Okay, have a good day. Bye-bye.